My name is Rabbi Rutenberg. I'm one of the founders of the Emet organization. And one of the topics that we really focus on at Emet is Shalom Bayit and relationships. And Emet has had the suchut to run 4 major couples retreats. I think some of you have been at our retreats. And each one is really more phenomenal than the one before it. And these retreats focus on Shalom Bayit, they focus on parenting. And it's really encouraging to me to see so many people come to work on their relationships, to be the best spouses and the best parents that they can be. I think the true heroes of the Jewish people are those who work on themselves and who constantly strive to be the best that they can be. So chazak baruch to all of you. My background, in addition to being a rabbi, I also have a degree in clinical social work. And I have the opportunity to give a class to couples before their wedding. I've given it about 200 times, give or take. It's really one of the things I look forward to the most at Emet. I'm doing one tomorrow morning, is giving this class and helping couples start their relationships in the best way possible. And whether you're a newlywed, whether you've been married for many years, each one of us is working on these issues of Shalom Bayit and parenting, and chazak baruch to all of you. Very often we grew up in homes where, let's say, our mothers did not work. And we have a certain picture in our mind of what a mother should be doing. And although we're all intelligent, and sometimes this can actually happen to the most intelligent people, can do the stupidest things, right? And I actually had a conversation with a neighbor of mine, going back a few years ago, who was upset about, the husband was upset that his wife was not having dinner ready as she used to. And then I asked a few questions, and basically the wife had just started working full-time. Before she had working just a little bit, she was working full-time, and she was getting home like around 6 o'clock, 6:30. And the husband was getting home, that's about 7 o'clock, and he was expecting basically the same supper to be ready as if she wasn't working. And this is an intelligent person, but somehow it didn't compute in his mind that she's in a different situation now than she was before. It was such a given, like, you turn on the sink and water comes out. So, wife, cook supper. This is done. Laundry's done. This is done. That's done. And the reality is, when you have 2 people working in a home, it changes things. It's not so simple. And quite frankly, it could be that in many situations, it's better not to have 2 people working full-time. Now, we could get into a whole discussion of the cost of living here in New York, but it's extremely high. And all the different expenses, and whether it's housing expenses, or whether it's the tuition expense, or whether we're talking about the wedding expense, and I'm not talking about for the couple that's getting married. There's a tremendous amount of expenses and a tremendous amount of stress on families. And my answer to this, although I could talk about this at length, but my answer in short is there's one thing which has to do with the obligation from the ketubah of a husband and wife to each other. But there's another thing which has to do with common sense. We say there's 4 sections of the Shulchan Aruch, and the 5th one is common sense, using your chachma, using your dat. And very often, arguments and fights and disagreements break out in areas that don't need to break out. But if we would just be more understanding and realize that the dynamic here is different from where you grew up, and therefore it has to be treated differently, so many problems could be averted. Often, I find, the arguments get so quickly out of hand when it's so not necessary, where a husband might say, "You're not doing this," to his wife, and it'll come across as an attack, and she might respond with, "Why do you think I have to be doing this?" And it can quickly escalate to something which is very, very problematic. And if they'll both look at the situation from the side of, we're both in this together, we're both trying to build a family together, the situation could be de-escalated very quickly. Very often we put the effort in what we think is effort, but it's not what the other person needs. And we have a tendency, like Rabbi Rubikov mentioned with the 5 love language, we have a tendency of expecting others to be exactly like us, even though logically we know that that's not the case. And when we talk about effort in marriage, so much of the effort is in the thought, in the care, in the facial expressions. We say 80% of communication is nonverbal, which means that you could be making a lot of effort, but somehow your body language is coming across like you don't really want to be there. And sometimes it's subconscious. That's where you have to get to the therapist, it's in the deep subconscious. But our body language comes across in ways very often different than what we actually think that we're doing. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. I'll share a very quick story that I share with couples that just touches on the idea of effort. And this was a couple that my wife and I had the opportunity to learn with before their wedding. And this goes back like probably close to a decade ago. And the wife, the fiance, the kala, getting married in about 3 weeks. And she says to my wife, she says, my husband, my fiance hasn't said I love you to me yet. Is that a problem? And she's like, I know that he loves me, but he hasn't said those words. So I was learning with the chatan, and the next week I asked him, I said, and he's a very bright guy. He was working in Wall Street and a very nice person. And I said to him, I said, just curious, have you bought your wife flowers, your fiance flowers? And he says, no, should I? So I was getting the feeling that something is a little bit off. And then I said, what about write her a card? And he's like, no. So I challenged him and I said, listen, it's Thursday night for this Shabbat, buy her flowers, write a little card, it doesn't make a difference what it says, and give it to her before Shabbat. And I said, I'm going to follow up with you Moti Shabbat to see that you did it. I call him Moti Shabbat and he says to me, he goes, Rabbi, you're not going to believe what happened. We went to the florist to finalize the arrangement for the wedding, and the florist gave her flowers. I didn't have to do it. Oh my God! We got a problem here, Houston. We have a problem, right? So I dug a little bit deeper, and I asked him. I said, "Has she ever written you a card?" And he said to me, "A card." He's like, "She wrote me a 30-page letter of all the dreams and that she has for our marriage and all." She was very emotionally expressive, and he wasn't so emotionally expressive, but they made a very nice couple. And I explained to him something which I think is very important for all marriages, which is that I told him, if you write the silliest little thing on a little card that just says the word love somewhere there, or just says something nice, it's going to be gold to her because she knows that this is something that's not so easy for you to do. And I think when we think about effort, sometimes we have to think about, what does my spouse need? What exactly talks to them? And very often effort is not the thing that makes you sweat. It's like we say, it's not about working harder, it's about working smarter. We live in a time where technology has literally taken over our lives. And just to piggyback on Shabbat, I think if it wasn't for Shabbat, I don't know how anyone does it without Shabbat, honestly. So at least we have that one day without technology. And one of the advice that I would give is take advantage of Shabbat. Because on Shabbat, assuming we're Shomer Shabbat, we're not tempted by the technology. So make sure that at least on Shabbat, you're giving your spouse and your children the proper attention. This comes with planning. To give our spouses attention, to give our children attention, what I've learned in my own life, and sometimes the hard way, is it comes with planning properly ahead. It doesn't just happen. We need to have times when we're not using our phones at all. We have to have times when we're giving full attention to our spouse, to our children. And in order to do that, I really believe, and like I said before, I'm struggling with this myself, you need to plan ahead. And for example, as Rabbi Klatzko said, sometimes Shabbat is a day that people end up sleeping a lot more than they would sleep the rest of the week. But if we want to connect with our family, whether it's our spouse or our children, we can't go into Shabbat super tired because we need to be able to be attentive to those who we really care about on Shabbat. But in general, technology is extremely, extremely challenging. I think it's very, very important that we make it a priority to set limits on technology, and to try our best to make sure that we're paying attention to our spouses properly. There's studies that they've been doing more and more studies today, because smartphones, although it seems like they've been around forever, are only really about a decade old in America. And just now, major studies are coming out of the powerful impact that the cell phone has on our minds, and let alone the radiation, which is potentially an issue. But there's a tremendous amount of studies now that are showing that the connection to seeing our cell phones is similar, if not stronger, than heroin. Like the addiction, the cell phone addiction, to wanting to see who texted me, who WhatsApped me, how many messages do I have. And if we think about how strong that is, we all know that heroin, amongst other drugs, destroys marriages, destroys families, and destroys lives. Technology is doing the same thing in many, many ways. And although it's a great koach, technology is a great strength that can be used to bring people together, and you can text 100 people for a share, and you could do amazing, amazing things with technology. Like anything very powerful, it can be used for the good, and it can be used for the bad. And I think we have to be very, very cognizant and aware of how strong this is. I saw a study that the average person, and I have a feeling that many of us are better than average in this, which is not a good thing, touches our cell phone close to 3,000 times a day. Okay? So let's be careful. Very often, as Rabbi Kigel mentioned, and the question mentioned, a wife can feel that her husband is too close to his mother. I find this particularly an issue if by mistake you married a nice guy. Okay? Because then the guys who aren't such nice guys, they don't have such a problem with this. But it's the guys who really care and are really nice people that very often feel stuck. And sometimes it's more of an issue with the oldest son, sometimes it's more of an issue with the youngest son. But the issue is the guy feels stuck. He feels like if I make one step to the left, my wife says, you're a mama's boy. If I make one step to the right, my mother says, you're a traitor to me. And they feel stuck. And what do people do often when they feel stuck? They blame their wife for making a problem with their mother. They blame their mother for making a problem with their wife, and they go hang out with their friends. Right? And this is not the right solution. The right solution is a husband, and this is something that I teach in the class I give to couples before the wedding. A husband has to know that his first and foremost priority is his wife. And that doesn't mean that he doesn't have a mitzvah, kibbud av v'em, doesn't have a mitzvah to respect his parents, but his first responsibility is to his wife. And with chachma, with intelligence, we can figure out a way to make sure that both the mother and the wife feel that they're taken care of. First and foremost, we have to accept that we're not going to make everybody happy all the time. That's a recipe for disaster. And it takes a certain amount of chachma. Let's use an example. A couple's married for 2 years, and a mother who lives a few blocks away calls at 10:30 at night, and the couple was going to go to sleep soon. And the mother says, oh, my boy, whatever she calls him, some sweet name for him. And she says, Sasha, come on, please. The light in the hallway broke. You're the only one. You're so tall. You're the only one who can fix this light. You don't want your mother to fall, right? And she mentions on the side, and also, I haven't seen you in a few days, you know? And what is he supposed to do? So the worst possible thing he can do is say, I'd love to come, but my wife wouldn't let me go. That's the worst thing he can do. The smart thing to do is to, unless she's literally in a sakana, in a danger, is he should say, listen, I'm very tired, it's hard for me to come tonight, but I'll come tomorrow right after work, or I'll come tomorrow before I go to work. And the idea is that he has to go tomorrow. If he doesn't go tomorrow, then he's in big trouble. But if he goes tomorrow, chances are everything is going to be okay. What I tell couples is 95, or hope maybe even more, maybe 98% of parents want more than anything else that their children should be happy. Even their in-laws, even the chudos. They want their children to be happy. And if they're from the 2% that don't want their children to be happy, they need help. Send them to a therapist or find a good therapist. But you can't do anything about that. And if ultimately they want you to be happy, people respect people who respect themselves. And finally, I'll just say to what Rabbi Kigel, I think to Rabbi Kigel mentioned also, I find, or maybe, I think also Rabbi Meir mentioned this, I find that couples very often, subconsciously, maybe not on a conscious level, if they're not feeling so close to their spouse, they may not directly tell their parents to get involved, but they give messages that the Shalom Bayis isn't so strong. And that actually encourages the parents to get involved. And sometimes I've actually witnessed this, where children will get the parents involved because it's safer to make them the enemy than to make themselves the enemy. So the stronger you can have Shalom Bayit with your own spouse, the stronger your marriage is, your relationship is, you almost can be protected fully from this issue. People think of attraction as a physical thing. And this is a very big mistake. Attraction is just as much on the emotional side of the spectrum and the spiritual side of the spectrum as it is to the physical. When I teach couples, I draw a diagram of a triangle. If you picture a triangle with one side being the physical, the next side being the emotional, the third being the spiritual, or I like to call the meaning, the purpose of life. And life is made up of these three things. Intellectual, I guess, is somehow connected as well, but these three things make up life. And we tend to think of attraction as being a physical thing, but I'll prove to you that it's not physical. And the proof is that when you feel close to your spouse, they seem much more attractive than when you're a little distant from them. When there's a distance, suddenly that pimple on their face looks a lot bigger. Suddenly, if your spouse is short or tall or this or that, something a little bit different, it seems more odd. And what's the reason for this? Because our essence as human beings is we have a neshama, we have a soul. The connection that we have with our spouse is not purely a physical one, or I hope it isn't. It's so much more than that. It's on the spiritual and on the emotional plane as well. And if we realize this, then we won't look at attraction as being purely a physical thing. And very often, when you start feeling that, it's because the emotional connection is not where it should be. Having said that, on the physical side, it is important for couples to take care of themselves physically. And I often tell couples, I say, a healthy marriage is made up of two healthy individuals. And that means that even though you become one when you get married, you're still, in a way, an individual. You're a person who has your own needs, and you have to take care of those needs. You have to take care of your physical needs, your emotional needs, and therefore be able to be there for your spouse. So it's a big topic. I'll end with one other point. When a person says that they're not finding their spouse attractive, sometimes it can come from a deeper emotional, psychological issues where they're actually having issues with themselves. And this is like some deep psychology here, and I would recommend that you talk to your local therapist or find a good therapist to discuss this. But there's something called projection that happens, and where basically if a person doesn't feel good about themselves, they'll project that on their spouse. And sometimes what happens is a person doesn't feel attractive themselves, and therefore they'll start saying, I don't find my spouse attractive.